The cathedral's basement smelled of time, of ink turned to dust, of wood warped by centuries, of secrets pressed between pages that no living soul had touched for generations. Anna Moretti's footsteps echoed softly against the flagstones as she moved between shelves stacked high with forgotten ledgers and worm-eaten manuscripts. Her work was quiet, methodical and unseen, exactly how she preferred it. She had been the cathedral's archivist for 7 years, long enough for the priests to forget her name and refer to her simply as La Bibliotecaria. She didn't mind. The less attention, the better. Anna's world was built of parchment and patience, where the smallest smudge of ink could tell a story lost to history. It was on a damp Tuesday morning that she found it. She had been cataloguing a row of unmarked boxes stacked against the far wall. Boxes no one had touched in decades. The lids were swollen with moisture, their labels faded into ghostly scratches. She slipped on her gloves and opened the first one, revealing a haphazard pile of papers, fragments of leather bindings, and scraps of fabric that once may have been bookmarks. The second box was heavier. Inside, nestled among brittle sermon notes, lay a book unlike any she had seen before. Its leather cover was cracked and darkened, the edges curling like old bark. Across its surface ran a jagged stain, reddish-brown, seeping into the spine, the unmistakable fingerprint of blood. Anna froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She had seen ink stains, wine spills, even burn marks, but blood was rare. She turned it over carefully, revealing a clasp still intact. The metal was engraved with a cross, unlike the Latin one of the church. This was broader, its arms flared and equal, the unmistakable emblem of the Crusader orders. Her heart began to beat faster. Gingerly, she unfastened the clasp. The journal opened with a faint crackle of parchment. Inside, the handwriting was dense, precise, and old enough that even her trained eye took a moment to recognize the medieval Latin. Between the lines of flowing script, she noticed darker flecks, more dried blood, perhaps from a wound carried by the writer themselves. She scanned the first entry. It began with a date, Anno Domini 1212. The writer identified himself simply as Brother Matthias, a soldier of the cross returning from the Holy Land. His words were terse, almost fevered, describing not the glories of battle, but the weight of something he had carried back, something he swore must never be revealed to the false shepherds. Anna's gloved fingers lingered on the page. She had read thousands of journals from priests, soldiers, and merchants, but this one. There was a desperation here, a tone not of confession but of warning. She turned the pages slowly, past hurried sketches of fortified towns, cryptic symbols drawn in margins, and occasional smears where ink and blood had mingled. On the 12th page, she stopped. Beneath a paragraph describing a small chapel in the land where olive trees grow as weeds, Matthias had drawn a crude outline of what looked like a coastline. The edges of the drawing were marked with dots and crosses, but the ink was faint, as though meant to be overlooked by any casual reader. Anna's eyes narrowed. To most, the drawing would be meaningless, but to an archivist trained to spot inconsistencies, it was an invitation. The scale was wrong for decoration. The marks were too deliberate for random ornament. This was no idle sketch. It was a map. She closed the journal quickly, her pulse loud in her ears. From above, the cathedral bells began to toll the hour, the sound rolling through the stone walls like a warning. She placed the journal gently on her desk, her mind already racing. Why had no one else found this? How had it remained buried for so long? And why, most dangerously of all, did the writing speak of keeping this knowledge from the church itself. She glanced around the silent basement, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Brother Matthias's life. Her fingers returned to the cover, tracing the blood-stained leather. Somewhere between these pages and the sketch within lay a secret Brother Matthias had risked, perhaps even lost, his life to protect. And Anna Moretti, quiet archivist of San Benedetto Cathedral, had just pulled it back into the light. Anna spent the rest of the morning in a state of quiet agitation. She had sealed the journal in a protective sleeve, logged its discovery in the most minimal terms possible. Uncatalogued 13th century Crusader manuscript, fragile condition, and locked it in the preservation cabinet at the far corner of her workroom. But her mind wouldn't let it rest. Each time she glanced toward the cabinet, she felt the weight of it pressing back at her. The blood, the drawings, the warnings. She knew she should pass it on to the cathedral's head archivist for official review, but something deep in her gut told her to wait, not to hide it, but to understand it before letting it pass into other hands. It was past noon when she finally gave in to temptation. She slipped the key into the cabinet lock, retrieved the journal, and carried it to her desk beneath the narrow window that let in a blade of grey light. Page by page she began to work. The Latin was tight and deliberate, as though Matthias had been afraid of wasting ink. The early entries spoke of travel, Acre, Jerusalem, Antioch. But the tone was grim. No tales of heroism, no swelling pride in God's work. Instead, there were hints of betrayal among the Crusader ranks, of pacts made in shadowed tents, and truths denied to the flock. It was on the 17th page that Anna saw them for the first time. Symbols that were not letters. Tiny marks, almost invisible unless you looked directly at them, inked in a faint red-brown between lines of text. They weren't decorative flourishes. Their placement was too deliberate, their shapes too uniform. She leaned closer, heart thudding. The shapes repeated, though never in the same order. Circles intersected by lines, small clusters of dots, a pair of shapes like interlocked crosses. Anna knew this kind of concealment. Medieval scribes sometimes hid messages in marginalia, using ciphers to mask dangerous information. But this was different. The placement of each mark corresponded to a word or phrase in the main text, as if Matthias had been embedding an entirely separate narrative alongside the visible one. She took out a thin sheet of tracing paper, carefully marking each symbol as she found it. After several pages, a pattern began to emerge. It was a path, a string of shapes aligned to form a crude directional map, though the landmarks were unfamiliar. Here and there, Matthias had drawn small figures, not towns, but perhaps statues or shrines, which might once have stood as markers. And always, beside each figure, a small dark smear. Anna's stomach tightened. She dipped her pen in ink and began transcribing the main text, cross-referencing the symbols. The process was painstaking, but by late afternoon she had confirmed it. The marks were not random. They were coordinates, embedded in a travel account meant to look like an ordinary crusader's journal. And then she saw the line that made her skin prickle. There, beyond the olive grove, I placed the thing we swore to guard from Rome until the last trumpet. She set her pen down. Guard from Rome. Not from invaders, not from the infidel, but from the church itself. Her mind reeled. What could be so dangerous, so contrary to the church's interests, that a Crusader knight would bleed over his own journal to hide it? A sound broke her thoughts. A slow, deliberate knock on the doorframe. Father De Luca stood there, hands clasped behind his back. He was the cathedral's senior historian, a man whose eyes missed nothing. "You've been down here all day, Signorina Moretti," he said softly. "Working on something important?" Anna's pulse spiked. She slid her tracing paper beneath a stack of old inventories. "Just routine cataloguing," she replied. His gaze lingered on the journal lying open on her desk. "That binding," he murmured. "It's very old and very Crusader." She forced a polite smile. "A curiosity, nothing more." For a moment, silence filled the basement. Then he gave a short nod and walked away, his footsteps fading up the stone steps. Anna exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening on the edge of the desk. She could still see the faint red symbols in her mind's eye, forming a map that no one, perhaps not even the Vatican itself, was meant to follow. But now that she had begun to read it, there was no turning back. That night, Anna dreamt of the map. She saw olive groves shimmering in the heat, their gnarled trunks twisting like the handwriting in the Crusader's journal. Between the trees, she followed a path marked by blood-colored symbols carved into ancient stones. And at the end, beneath a sky the color of ash, a small chapel crouched like a sentinel, its door chained shut, its walls whispering a language older than prayer. She woke with her heart hammering. The morning light over Florence was pale and cold, but Anna's mind was burning. She had spent years cataloguing other people's discoveries, always keeping her own curiosity contained within the margins of her work. But this was different. She returned to the basement before anyone else had arrived. Unlocking the preservation cabinet, she set the journal and her tracings side by side, determined to make sense of the path Matthias had left. Step by step, she cross-referenced the coordinates against historical maps. Some landmarks had vanished, rivers had shifted, villages had crumbled into dust. But others remained, stubborn survivors of time. A bridge from the Roman era, a crumbling tower built by Norman masons, a hilltop shrine now swallowed by forest. And then she found it. One of the coordinates matched a location in southern Italy, far from the Crusader battlefields, a coastal region where olive groves grew wild and unclaimed. Historical records described it only in passing as Terra Ecclesia Nullius, land belonging to no church. Her hands trembled as she traced the route from the port of Bari inland. The path was exact. The final mark sat beside a crude drawing of a chapel, its doorway flanked by what appeared to be 2 carved lions. She flipped back to the journal's main text, reading Matthias's words in their proper order for the first time. He spoke of a relic taken from the hands of the infidel, but not made by them. A relic, older than the temple, older than Rome. Older than Rome. The phrase struck her like a blow. The Church taught that its roots ran directly to the time of Christ. To find something older, something predating those foundations, could unravel the entire narrative. She sat back, pressing her fingertips to her temples. Was this what Matthias had been trying to protect? Not a treasure, but a truth. Her thoughts were interrupted by the low murmur of voices above. The sound carried faintly through the stone floor. 2 men speaking in Latin, the clipped tones of Vatican officials. Anna froze. The cathedral's library occasionally received visitors from the Vatican archives, but their presence was rare and always announced. She crept to the foot of the stairs, listening. "Unconfirmed," one voice said. "But De Luca believes she may have found something." The other replied sharply. "Then secure it before it leaves this building." Anna's stomach turned. They knew. Somehow, Father De Luca had guessed more than he let on. Returning to her desk, she gathered the journal, tracings, and notes into a satchel. Her mind worked quickly. If she left now, she could take the early train south to Bari, then disappear inland before any questions could be asked. Her eyes fell once more on Matthias's blood-stained page. Until the last trumpet. It was not just a warning, it was a promise. Anna stood, every nerve alive with the knowledge that the quiet life she had built was over. She would follow the map, she would find the chapel, and whatever lay there, whether treasure or truth, she would decide for herself if it should remain hidden. Upstairs, the cathedral's heavy front doors creaked open, and footsteps began to descend toward the basement. She didn't wait to see who it was. The streets of Florence were just waking when Anna stepped outside, the satchel tight against her side. The cathedral bells marked the hour with slow, resonant chimes, each one seeming to push her farther from safety. She kept her head down, weaving through the narrow lanes toward the station, the sound of approaching footsteps never far from her imagination. By the time she reached the train, her hands were cold, despite the morning warmth. She boarded quickly, choosing a seat by the window with a clear view of the platform. The old diesel engine groaned to life, shuddering as it prepared to depart. A shadow moved at the far end of the platform. Two men in dark suits were scanning the crowd, their attention focused and deliberate. Anna shifted in her seat, pulling the curtain halfway closed. The train lurched forward. She didn't breathe until Florence had receded into the distance. The journey south was long, the landscape shifting from rolling hills to the sunburnt plains of Puglia. Anna barely noticed the scenery. Her mind was on the journal, locked in her satchel, and the blood-brown symbols that seemed to pulse every time she closed her eyes. When she finally stepped off the train in Bari, the air was heavy with salt and the distant tang of olive wood smoke. She rented a small car from the station kiosk and studied her notes under the shade of a palm. The route Matthias had drawn was clear now. A winding inland road, skirting old watchtowers and abandoned monasteries, until it vanished into an unmarked trail near the hills. But she wasn't alone. At the edge of the car park, a black sedan idled, its tinted windows reflecting the sun. Anna told herself it was nothing, just a coincidence, but her instincts said otherwise. She got into the car, pulling out into traffic and deliberately taking a few unnecessary turns. The sedan followed. By late afternoon, she reached the first landmark from Matthias's map, a weathered Roman bridge spanning a shallow stream. Moss clung to its stones, and the air here was unnervingly still. She parked nearby, stepping out to take photographs for her records, though her real purpose was to verify that the Crusaders' symbols matched the stone carvings on the bridge's arch. They did. Perfectly. A low hum of tires on gravel made her turn. The sedan had stopped a short distance behind her. Two men got out, one tall and thin, the other broad-shouldered. Both wore the same expression, not hostile but watchful, as if cataloguing her every move. "Signorina Moretti!" the tall one called, his Italian precise, almost too formal. "We are here on behalf of the Vatican Library. There are concerns about a manuscript you've found." Anna forced a neutral smile. "The manuscript is in Florence," she lied. "I'm here on personal business." The broad-shouldered man's gaze flicked to her satchel. Then you won't mind if we look inside? Her pulse roared in her ears. She stepped back toward her car, placing it between herself and them. "I think we're done here," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor running through her. The tall one gave a thin smile. For now. They returned to their sedan without another word, but she knew this wasn't over. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Anna followed the map's route deeper into the countryside. The road narrowed, climbing into hills lined with ancient olive trees, their silver leaves whispering in the wind. Somewhere beyond them lay the next mark, the hilltop shrine. She pressed her foot to the accelerator, the shadows lengthening across the road. Every mile forward felt like a countdown, not just to whatever Matthias had hidden, but to the moment when the Vatican's polite patience would turn into something far less forgiving. The hilltop shrine was exactly where Matthias's map promised it would be, though time had reduced it to a skeleton of stone and weeds. 3 crumbling pillars still stood, their capitals carved with faint reliefs of lions, the same lions sketched in the journal beside the final chapel. Anna parked at the foot of the hill, the scent of wild thyme and dust heavy in the air. The sun was sliding lower, staining the sky a muted gold, but she knew she couldn't stop here for the night. Every instinct told her the men in the black sedan were still somewhere behind her. She climbed the slope, boots scraping against loose rock, until she reached the shrine's platform. From here the land rolled away in waves of olive groves, their silver-green shimmer stretching to the horizon. She turned slowly, holding Matthias's tracing against the scene before her. The alignment was perfect. The shrine was a waypoint, a compass marker pointing toward the last destination. Beyond the hills lay a small valley, and in that valley, according to the Crusader's hand, a chapel where the stones remember the blood of kings. She took a long breath, feeling the weight of centuries pressing in. The more she pieced together, the more her curiosity warred with an unease that sat deep in her bones. What relic could force a crusader to write in code? What truth could make him bleed over his own journal rather than let it fall into the hands of Rome? Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint rumble. She looked down the hill to see the black sedan crawling along the dirt road, its engine low and deliberate. The men had found her. Anna scrambled down the opposite slope, using the cover of low shrubs. At the bottom, a narrow shepherd's path wound toward the next valley. She slipped onto it, forcing herself into a steady pace, the satchel thumping against her hip. The path twisted through groves where the air was cooler and the light dimmer, until she reached a tumbled stone wall, the remnants of a field boundary. An old man was sitting there mending a wicker basket. He looked up, his eyes sharp under heavy brows. "You're not from here," he said in Italian, the dialect thick. "No," Anna admitted, "but I'm looking for a chapel. Old. Forgotten." He studied her for a moment before nodding toward the west. "My grandfather told stories of a place like that. Said it was cursed. Men who went there didn't come back." Her pulse quickened. "Do you know where?" He pointed with the handle of his basket. "Follow the stream until it disappears into the ground. Then keep walking. You'll see the lions." Anna thanked him and moved on, her boots crunching over dry earth. The stream appeared soon after, a trickle of water running between mossy stones, vanishing into a hollow where the land dipped. She followed the hollow until the sound of water faded entirely. The trees here were denser, their trunks gnarled and blackened in places by old lightning strikes. And then, through the shadows, She saw them. Two stone lions, weathered but still proud, standing guard over a low doorway half hidden by vines. The chapel. Her breath caught. The doorway was exactly as Matthias had drawn it. She stepped closer, brushing away the vines, and saw that the door itself was gone, replaced by rough planks nailed across the entrance. On one of the planks, the Crusader's seal was carved deep into the wood, the same flared cross from the journal's clasp. Anna reached out, her fingers grazing the carving. Somewhere inside, the truth Matthias had died to protect was waiting. But before she could think of her next move, the sound of tires on gravel snapped her head up. The sedan had found the valley. Anna's heart lurched. The sedan's dark shape crept into view between the olive trees, its headlights off despite the fading light. She backed into the chapel's shadow, her mind racing. The planks across the doorway were old, the nails rusted, but breaking them would make noise. Noise would give her away. A gust of wind rattled the branches overhead, masking the sound as she pressed her shoulder to the wood. The first plank groaned but gave slightly. She pushed harder, ignoring the sting in her muscles until it snapped free with a muted crack. Another plank, then another. She slipped inside, letting the vines fall back over the entrance. The air inside was cool, heavy with the scent of damp stone and centuries-old dust. A shaft of dying sunlight spilled through a small window high in the wall, illuminating rows of broken pews. At the far end, beneath a crumbling arch, lay a raised stone platform, an altar, its surface covered in deep scratches as though someone had tried to obliterate whatever had once been carved there. Anna stepped carefully, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Matthias's map had shown the relic hidden beneath the heart of the lion. She scanned the chapel, searching for any sign of that emblem. Her gaze fell on the floor to the left of the altar. There, carved into a loose slab of stone, was the faint outline of a lion's head. She crouched, tracing the shape with her fingers. The slab shifted under her touch. With effort, she pried it up, revealing a narrow hollow beneath. Inside, wrapped in brittle linen, was a small wooden chest no larger than a loaf of bread. She lifted it out, the weight surprising her, heavier than it looked. The lid was bound with a strip of iron, secured by a lock so corroded it crumbled when she brushed it with her thumb. Inside lay an object swaddled in layers of cloth. She peeled them back slowly, revealing a disc of polished black stone, etched with symbols that were neither Latin nor Greek, but older, impossibly older. Around the edge ran a ring of gold, inscribed with words in a language she did not recognize. The moment her eyes met the symbols, a cold tremor ran through her. They were the same shapes she had traced from between Matthias's lines, the same code that had led her here, but now they told a different story. This was no Christian relic. This was something far older, perhaps from a civilization lost before Rome had drawn its first breath. If its origin was ever proven, it would upend not only the Church's history, but the very foundation of Western civilization's timeline. Footsteps echoed outside. Anna wrapped the relic quickly and slid it into her satchel. She moved toward the shadows at the back of the chapel, where a collapsed section of wall opened onto the grove beyond. The first man entered through the front, the tall one from the sedan. His voice was low, almost reverent. "So it is true. You found it." She didn't answer. The second man's heavier steps followed, his silhouette blocking the doorway. "You can't possibly understand what you're holding," he said, his tone more warning than threat. "Give it to us. No one else needs to know." Anna's hand tightened on the satchel strap. "That's exactly the point, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They stepped forward in unison, but she was already moving, slipping through the break in the wall, ducking into the thick olive trees. She didn't look back until she was halfway down the hill, where the glow of the chapel's window flickered like a dying ember in the dusk. The relic was hers now, but so was the choice Matthias had faced 8 centuries ago: hide the truth or set it free. The night swallowed Anna whole as she descended into the valley, each step muffled by the dry grass and fallen leaves. She moved fast, but not recklessly. Every twig snap, every rustle of the trees made her freeze and listen. Somewhere behind, the Vatican men were following. She could feel it more than hear it, a pressure in the air that matched the weight in her satchel. By the time she reached the dirt road, the moon had risen, casting a thin silver light over the hills. Her rented car was parked where she had left it, half hidden behind an old stone wall. She unlocked it with trembling hands and slid inside, careful to keep the relic pressed against her side. The engine turned over with a low growl. She drove without headlights for the first stretch, the road lit only by the moon, until she reached the main track. The air inside the car was hot and heavy, smelling faintly of dust and the faint metallic tang from the relic's gold inlay. Every instinct told her to drive straight to a port, get on the first ferry to anywhere far from Italy. But as the kilometers rolled by, a different thought began to take root. Matthias had gone to unthinkable lengths to hide this artifact. If she simply ran, would she be honoring his choice or betraying it? The relic itself seemed to pull at her mind. Even wrapped in cloth, its weight felt unnatural, almost intentional, as though it carried not just mass, but a presence. At a stop sign in a sleeping village, she glanced at it in the passenger seat. For a moment she imagined the symbols glowing faintly, like embers under ash. She shook the thought away and kept driving. By dawn, she had crossed into a coastal town, the kind of place where fishing boats still outnumbered cars. She parked near the pier, killing the engine, and let the salty wind clear her head. She wasn't alone. A man stood at the end of the pier, facing the water. Not one of the Vatican's watchers. This one was older, stooped, wearing a fisherman's cap. But when he turned, his eyes locked on her with a clarity that made her skin prickle. "You have it," he said in accented Italian, as though the words weren't a question. Anna's grip tightened on the satchel strap. "Who are you?" "Someone who has waited a very long time," he replied. "My family. We kept the stories. We were told that one day someone might come with the relic and that we should give them the choice." "The choice. What happens if I give it to you?" she asked. He smiled faintly, but there was sadness in it. "Then it will go back where it belongs, to the earth, and to silence. The world is not ready for what it will prove. And if I don't, then you will carry the burden, and you will not be able to undo it." Anna's thoughts spun. She imagined the artifact in a museum, glass-bound and stripped of its context, another trophy of human curiosity. She imagined it in the Vatican's vaults, sealed and forgotten, its truth erased from history, and she imagined it in her own possession, a secret she could never speak without shattering lives, faiths, perhaps even nations. A car engine echoed down the coastal road, the black sedan. The fisherman's eyes flicked past her to the approaching sound. "Choose quickly," he murmured. Anna reached into the satchel her fingers closing around the relic. The stone was cool, but the gold edge was warm, as if it had been waiting for her decision all along. Behind her, the Vatican men were getting closer. In front of her, the fisherman simply waited. The morning sun broke over the water, turning the sea into a sheet of molten gold. Anna stood on the pier, the relic heavy in her hands, the black sedan rolling to a slow stop behind her. She could feel the eyes of the Vatican men even before their doors opened. The fisherman didn't move. He watched her like a man witnessing the end of a story he'd heard all his life. The tall Vatican agent stepped forward, his voice calm but edged. "Signorina Moretti, you've done well to find it. But now it must come with us, for its own safety and yours." Anna looked from him to the fisherman, then down at the relic. The polished black stone reflected the sunlight in a way that made the symbols ripple, as though they were shifting under her gaze. She remembered Matthias's words, "Guard from Rome until the last trumpet." Her voice was steady. "You mean for it never to be seen again?" The agent's expression didn't change. "There are truths that serve no one if revealed." "And lies," the fisherman said quietly, "that serve only those who tell them." The wind off the water whipped through her hair. She thought of the Crusader, dying perhaps, bleeding onto his own journal as he carved a path for someone, someday, to find this. She thought of the centuries it had waited, buried beneath the chapel's stone lions. And she thought of herself, a quiet archivist who had never asked for this choice, yet now stood as the last link in an unbroken chain of secrecy. Anna turned, walking to the very edge of the pier. The relic caught the sun, its gold inlay flaring for an instant like fire. The Vatican men froze. "Don't," the broad-shouldered one said, his voice low but urgent. The fisherman's eyes never left hers. "If you put it back into the earth," he said, "it will be safe. But if you give it to them, you will never know what becomes of it." Anna's heart pounded. In her mind, she saw two futures, one where the artifact lay hidden again, and another where its truth, dangerous as it was, burst into the world. She closed her eyes and chose. The relic left her hands in a single decisive motion. It arced through the air, caught the sunlight one last time, and vanished into the depths with barely a splash. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the fisherman exhaled, as though a burden older than himself had finally lifted. The Vatican men stood rigid, their faces unreadable, but she could see the tension in their jaws. "You've just erased something from history," the tall one said. "No," Anna replied, turning away from the water. "I've just kept a promise." Weeks later, back in Florence, the cathedral basement felt smaller than she remembered. The journal was gone, reclaimed, no doubt, by those who had followed her. But she carried something they couldn't take, the knowledge that Matthias's secret was still his. Sometimes, alone at her desk, she would catch herself tracing the shapes of the Crusaders' symbols in the margins of her notes. She never wrote them down, never spoke them aloud. They were hers to keep and to guard. Moral of the story: some truths are too powerful to belong to anyone. The measure of integrity is not in what you uncover, but in what you choose to protect, even from the world itself. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.